What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. As I'm recording this, I do not know the outcome of this Brandon Ayuk situation, but drafts are starting. We got to make some decisions. So I'm going to do this breakdown of Pickens versus T. Higgins versus Tank Dell, assuming that Ayuk does not sign, or at least assuming that we don't know the answer to that while you're drafting. We should just assume that if Ayuk is traded, then we're going to move Pickens to last on this list, but we'll talk about that. So sit back, hit the like button. Let's start things off with George Pickens. He's entering year 3 at 23 years old. He was a very young rookie. Had a very good start to his career so far, even playing across from a very high-end target earner in Deontay Johnson. 52 receptions, 801 yards, 4 touchdowns as a rookie, 63 receptions, 1,140 yards, 5 touchdowns in year 2. The numbers last season also very, very strong for someone who was 22 years old. Worth pointing out, though, how volatile he was. Had over 125 receiving yards in 4 games, less than 50 receiving yards 9 times. He had a 0-yard week, a -1-yard week, despite full snap share in both weeks. If we look at the underlying metrics, we see he's clearly an X wide receiver. He is clearly at his best working deep downfield. He can definitely win in the intermediate areas of the field, just not someone that's going to operate good shallow, and still his best routes are one that get deep downfield. When they put him into contested catch situations, just that's where he excels. In terms of success rates over receptionperception.com, league average versus man coverage, awful versus zone, better than it was in year 1, but still terrible against zone coverage, and strong versus press, not elite or anything, but very strong. Wasn't great necessarily versus double teams, but for pretty much every wide receiver, it's a relatively small sample for double teams. Overall, he has the profile of a player who can be a dominant outside wide receiver. He just wasn't that last season, and there's definitely no guarantee that he will be this year. It is certainly possible that, he develops, right? He's going into his year 23 season, so he's still very young. He is right now younger than a couple rookie wide receivers this season, so there is no saying that he cannot develop. He can't become a man beater who's also great versus press and has this physical frame that can win deep downfield. It's just that he isn't that last season, so we don't know that's going to happen. There's also obviously the unknown of Brandon Ayuk. I can see why Pittsburgh is interested in Brandon Ayuk, because as of right now, again, I think Pickens is best used kind of like T. Higgins, funny enough, just someone who's clearly talented, clearly a great wide receiver, and can be a number 1 on a team for sure, but is most effectively used if you're trying to be a great offense as a very high-end complement to a true number 1 wide receiver. As of right now, again, I don't think he is true number 1, but again, I want to reiterate, he's only 23, and he made a good jump from year 1 into year 2. So I'm not saying he can't develop in year 3, be a true number 1. It's just that the Pickens that we know so far probably is best used with the number 1 ahead of him. And like I said before, if Ayuk ends up getting traded to Pittsburgh, I think he's still going to have a strong season. Again, I think that's where he's best used, and he'll be efficient. Teams will not be able to double team him, so we'll get more one-on-one coverage. That's great deep downfield. So I think he'd still have a strong season. He'd still be someone that maybe in the flex spot, you're still starting every single week, but he would have to be last in this trio if you are in your draft and you know that you did get traded to the Steelers. Next up, T. Higgins. Again, Pickens and T. Higgins are very similar players. Both carry round 2 draft capital. Pickens is an inch shorter, a little bit lighter, but not too different size-wise. Both have around the 75th percentile height adjusted speed. Both are pretty league average against man coverage, poor versus zone coverage, and above average versus the press. And both are best used in the deep and intermediate areas of the field. The big difference between the two of them in fantasy is just the situation. And that's really the only differentiator, is the teams they're on, the offenses that they have, and the competition on these teams. Higgins obviously has much better quarterback play and is on the significantly better offense overall. but he does have a top 5 wide receiver ahead of him, the way that Pickens, at least as of right now, does not. That's why Pickens, would obviously be a lot less valuable if Ayuk goes there, because if the only difference between these two is the quarterback play, the coaching, and the opportunity, if you take away the opportunity, that's the thing that obviously Pickens wins at. Now Higgins is winning by a mile. So again, that's why he would definitely be last there. But between these two, given that we don't know, or at least I don't know right now if that's going to happen, who would I rather in a draft, knowing that it is still a possibility? You all know my general philosophy in chasing ceiling wherever you can in drafts. That doesn't mean just like never taking consistent players, never taking players who can't be a wide receiver one, because not everyone can be a wide receiver one, and not just saying, oh, well, a 5th percentile outcome here is great, so I'm going to completely ignore the other 95% of outcomes. But when players are close in skill, close in projection, I want to think about upside scenarios, if that player ends up having a strong season. And I also want to think about the likelihood of that scenario happening, the likelihood of them hitting that ceiling. And to me, Pickens just has the better combo of ceiling and chance of hitting that ceiling. Ja'Marr Chase is a top 5 wide receiver, and I do think the Bengals are going to get more out of their wide receiver 3 spot this year. Yosivas having an amazing camp. Jermaine Burton not having an amazing camp, but putting it together a lot more recently. Still a very high-end prospect, someone they're very excited about, who clearly has the talent. Both of them rotating into that 3 spot, or one of them completely taking over, I think is going to get them more production than they've had in the past at that spot. So there's, a solid amount of competition on the Bengals. And even if you had an injury to Ja'Marr Chase, I think they have enough talent to where I don't actually know if T. Higgins would finish as a top 10 wide receiver. Compare that to George Pickens. He's competing with Van Jefferson, Calvin Austin, Roman Wilson once he's healthy, but he's not a very high-end prospect. Quez Watkins, Scotty Miller, like an absolutely pathetic wide receiver room. That opens up a world where Pickens could have north of a 25% target share this season. That's notable because right now I have him projected at 21.75%. Very conservative. Honestly, there is a world where Ayuk gets traded and he still has a 21.75% target share. 21.75 is a very conservative projection for George Pickens this season. Even at that projection, he does come in slightly better in the projections in all scoring formats than T. Higgins. So I understand the risk you're assuming by taking Pickens, not knowing if Ayuk is traded there. But I want to reiterate that even if that were to happen, I still think Pickens has enough talent and a strong enough role in this offense to where you'd still be starting him every week, even if it moves from wide receiver 2 into the flex spot. It's not going to crater his value if that happens. So I understand if that's too much risk for you, you want to avoid that, just take T. Higgins, because they are very, very close as prospects and just as fantasy producers this season. Personally, I think it's worth taking the risk. I still, if it came to it, would draft George Pickens over T. Higgins until we know for sure about the trade. But then obviously if we knew that Ayuk wasn't being traded, I'd still obviously prefer Pickens over Higgins. So that's those two. What about Tank Dell? Dell's entering year 2 in the NFL. And since he was a super old rookie, he's actually going to be 25 years old in October. So even though it's only year 2 for him, he is less than a year younger than T. Higgins. He is more than a year older than George Pickens. Regardless, though, no one on this list is old, so age doesn't matter that much, but that's definitely worth noting, especially for those of you in Dynasty Leagues. He was awesome, though, as a rookie. 74th percentile success rate versus man coverage is far better than Pickens or T. Higgins. He was also much better versus zone. He wasn't amazing, but they're so bad against it that he was better versus zone coverage. Weaker versus press, but he was still above average. So an above average wide receiver versus press, and how the Texans offense operates, he's not really going to see press coverage all that much. They're very good at moving him off of the line. They have Nico Collins. He'll play the X most of the time. You just know that he's not going to see much pressure coverage. But again, that's not really a detriment to his game, even with how small he is. Very good against that. In terms of route running, in terms of ability to just get open versus whatever coverage is in front of you, Tank Dell is the best wide receiver on this list. In terms of competition, though, he probably has the most. Nico Collins is worse than Jamar Chase, but I mean, Stephon Diggs is so much better than like Yosevas and Burton that I still think he has more competition, Tank Dell more competition than T. Higgins. And then, I mean, we're not going to compare the Texans wide receivers to the Steelers. I don't want Pittsburgh fans to get too sad there. What's interesting about Dell, though, is that we don't really know how the fantasy production is going to shake out. We know positionally, Nico's likely going to play the X most of the time, Tank Dell as the flanker, Diggs out of the slot. But because all three of them can play all three positions, and because they have a smart coaching staff that will put their players in position to succeed, we can assume that they're going to kind of move all three of them around the formation, just depending on what they want to do on that specific play, where they want to target on the field, what player they want to get involved. So it's kind of difficult to project exactly who's going to hit for more deep plays, who's going to get more touchdowns, more yardage, more receptions, because they're all going to be moved around. They're all going to be featured at different times. What I always go back to with Dell is like, had he stayed healthy in his rookie season, I think there's a decent chance he'd be going at that like round 2 turn right next to Nico Collins and potentially ahead of Nico Collins. His 17-week pace before his injury was 80 receptions, over 1,200 yards, and 12 touchdowns. That is not something that Pickens, T. Higgins have even sniffed in their career. He had double-digit targets in 4 of 10 healthy games. Do you know how many double-digit target games the other two have? Pickens has 2 across 34 career games, and both of them were exactly 10. He's never exceeded 10 targets. And while Higgins has 8, it's across 53 healthy games, so 6% of games with double-digit targets for George Pickens, 15% for T. Higgins, 40% for Tank Dell. And that's with, Dell only clearing a 61% snap share 7 times in his short career. So trust me, I understand the danger of this like small sample size argument for Tank Dell. But the fact of the matter is, in our only exposure to him as an NFL wide receiver, he's been amazing. And it would be a little bit surprising if he was all of a sudden bad this season, given that he's going to grow into year 2, that his quarterback's going to develop into year 2, that he's never going to be double teamed. He's never going to be the primary focus on defense. And it's not like these other 2 wide receivers don't have unknowns themselves. T. Higgins, the unknown of will he finally stay healthy? Many, many, many times in T. Higgins' career, it's tough to trust him because he's always banged up. He's always going out there and being like, please play at least half the game, because he just limps off the field half the time. And also, this offense, right? Like, what are they going to look like without Brian Callahan? What are they going to look like with a new run game? What are they going to look like with Yosevas, Burton kind of mixing in? Does that limit the snap share of T. Higgins at times if both of them are playing well, or even the target share? Like, there are still unknowns with T. Higgins. Pickens, will he develop into that number 1 wide receiver? He's not yet. He's not a number 1 wide receiver. Will it happen this season? Maybe, but will teams notice? Be like, okay, well, you didn't get Ayuk. All right, so would I rather just like double team you every play, take you away, know that you're not going to beat us in a short area, so we know kind of where you're going to be operating, force Van Jefferson and Calvin Austin to beat us with poor quarterback play? Yeah, that's pretty easy for defenses to scheme away. So none of these 3 wide receivers are perfect prospects, and that's why none of them go in the top 4 rounds. So if I'm sitting there in round 5 and I want to go wide receiver, which I often do want to go wide receiver in round 5, personally, I would rank them Tank Dell, then George Pickens, then T. Higgins. I just have to rank Tank Dell first because even though it's not the most likely outcome, I think the most likely outcome is Nico Collins leading this team in fantasy production. There is absolutely a chance, and not like a 5% chance, okay, decent chance that Tank Dell is the most valuable wide receiver on the Texans this season, and that level of upside is too good to pass up. Then, as I said before, with Pickens and Higgins, both are similar talents, but even though the Bengals offense is going to be better this season, Pickens' potential target share is just so much higher than T. Higgins. And given that there's also that chance that he does develop into year 3, again, only 23 years old, there's definitely a chance he takes a step forward, that he develops as a route runner, and he becomes someone that's not just winning deep downfield, but winning in all areas of the field at that frame, that talent level, and that potential target share. that just opens up a much higher ceiling than what T. Higgins has at this point. Because, like, sure, you could argue T. Higgins isn't old, but we know what T. Higgins is. He's had enough time in the NFL. We've seen him develop enough to where, like, it would be shocking if T. Higgins came out there and was a completely different player heading in to year 5. We know what he is. We know what his ceiling is. We don't technically know what these other two, and that's just a little bit more exciting in this range if they're going to project relatively similarly in their average outcomes. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below if you would rank them differently. And if you have a breakdown you want to see next week, absolutely put that in the comments as well. Upvote the responses you agree with. Also, I know drafts are coming up for a lot of you right now. So if you want to see my exact rankings for every single player in every single scoring format, see that all on my website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. I'll be back tomorrow with another video. But that, my friends, is the end of this one. Please leave a like if you watched this far. Make sure you subscribe if you're new here. Thanks for watching.